"Hold my baby, I'm going to sing," said Keisha, handing her 8-month-old son Tyler to a woman in the audience who looked at her with a mixture of pity and discomfort. The auditorium of the prestigious Metropolitan Cultural Center fell completely silent, the kind of awkward silence that precedes an impending catastrophe. The woman hesitated, clearly uncomfortable holding a child from a stranger who had just interrupted the city's most exclusive gala event. I don't know if," she murmured, backing away slightly. "Please," Keisha insisted with disconcerting calm, "he doesn't bite. And I promise it will be worth it." What was supposed to be an elegant fundraising evening for the theater's renovation had turned into a public spectacle when the 24-year-old black woman, wearing clearly worn clothes and carrying a baby in her arms, had somehow managed to get past security and reach the main stage. "My goodness, how did this person get in here?" whispered socialite Victoria Caldwell, chair of the organizing committee, a little too loudly to her assistant. "Where is security? This is embarrassing." The musical director, Maestro Richardson, a 60-year-old man with decades of experience in elite events, quickly took to the stage to try to control the situation. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately. This is a private event and—" "I know exactly what kind of event this is," Keisha interrupted, her voice echoing clearly through the sound system without her even having to approach the microphones. "An event to celebrate exceptional talent and promote diversity in the arts, isn't it?" The irony in her voice was so sharp that it cut through the growing murmur of the audience of 300 guests, each paying $1,000 for a ticket. Keisha Hayes never imagined she would end up on that stage like this. A music graduate with a scholarship, a single mother since the age of 19, she had spent the last 5 years struggling to get any opportunity in the city's conservative artistic scene. "Look, honey," Richardson said in a patronizing tone that made several members of the audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I understand that you may be going through a difficult time, but interrupting our event is not the right way to—" "3 minutes," Keisha interrupted. "Give me 3 minutes to sing and I'll leave. If you don't like it, promise me I'll never bother anyone here again." The murmur in the audience grew. Some called for the police, others seemed curious to see what would happen. But then something unexpected happened. A familiar voice echoed from the back of the auditorium, "Let her sing." All heads turned. It was Jonathan Mitchell, the city's most respected music critic, whose reviews could make or break careers. At 45, he had discovered some of the greatest musical talents of the last decade, and his presence at this event was a rare honor. "Jonathan, you can't be serious," said Victoria, clearly annoyed. "This is a disturbed woman who has crashed our event. We can't." "Actually," said Jonathan, slowly climbing the side stairs of the stage, "I know this young woman. And if she says she can sing, I suggest we listen." The auditorium grew even more tense. How would a renowned critic know a woman who had just crashed a gala event? Keisha looked directly into Jonathan's eyes, and for a brief moment, something passed between them, a complicity, a mutual understanding that no one else in the audience could decipher. "3 minutes then," said Richardson, clearly pressured by the critic's presence. "But if this turns into a circus, It won't," Keisha assured him, finally getting the woman in the audience to hold Tyler, who miraculously remained calm throughout all the commotion. "It will be unforgettable." As she positioned herself center stage, some members of the audience began pulling out their cell phones, clearly expecting to document what they believed to be an impending disaster. The theatrical lighting created a dramatic contrast with her solitary figure, and for the first time that night, the Metropolitan Cultural Center was completely silent. What those privileged people didn't know was that every look of contempt, every condescending whisper, every gesture of impatience was about to turn into something that would change not only that night, but the history of that place forever. If this story of courage and determination is touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple single mother would transform the most elitist night in the city into a moment no one would ever forget. What the privileged audience didn't know was that Keisha Hayes and Jonathan Mitchell had a history that went back 5 years, when she still believed that talent and dedication were enough to overcome the invisible barriers of the elitist music world. 3 years of conservatory, 2 years of masters, and for what? Keisha had said to Jonathan on that rainy October afternoon, sitting on the steps of the music school where she had just been released from her position as assistant professor. "To find out that my degree is worth less than the color of my skin?" Jonathan, then just an up-and-coming critic, had witnessed the whole charade. Keisha was the most talented teacher the institution had ever had, But when wealthy parents began to express concerns about the cultural appropriateness of their children's music education, the administration did not hesitate to come up with elaborate excuses for her dismissal. Budget issues, Director Hamilton, father of 3 students at the school and owner of a fortune built on real estate investments, had lied. Nothing personal, you understand? But Keisha knew it was completely personal. It was about her students, for the first time, being exposed to true musical diversity. It was about a young black woman daring to teach Mozart with the same authority with which she taught spirituals. It was about her proving that excellence had no color, and that deeply bothered those who preferred to keep classical music as the exclusive territory of the white elite. Now, 5 years later, standing in the same kind of environment that had rejected her, Keisha felt the weight of all those condescending glances. Victoria Caldwell whispered furiously with other socialites, clearly upset by the invasion of her carefully curated event. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Victoria muttered to her assistant. "I don't know how this person got in here, but I'll make sure it never happens again. Imagine the reputation of our committee after tonight." The irony did not escape Keisha. The same committee that now treated her like an intruder had made millions from events on diversity and inclusion in recent years, always taking care to keep that diversity only in speeches, never in practice. Richardson, the music director, checked his expensive watch and sighed impatiently. "Let's get this over with. We have a schedule to keep, and our donors didn't pay to see this." Tyler, still in the arms of the woman from the audience, began to whimper softly. The woman, clearly uncomfortable, looked around for a way to return the child. "He's hungry," she said, as if this were further proof of Keisha's unsuitability for this environment. 3 minutes, Keisha reminded them, her voice echoing through the auditorium with a calmness that contrasted dramatically with the palpable tension. "That's what you promised." Jonathan watched everything in silence, his hands clenched on the arms of his chair. He knew exactly what Keisha was capable of, but he also knew the cruelty of that audience when confronted with something that challenged their preconceived expectations. "Miss," Richardson began, realizing he didn't even know her name. "Hayes," Keisha finished. "Keisha Hayes. Graduated magna cum laude from the Juilliard School, master's degree in vocal performance from the Manhattan School of Music, former teacher at the Westfield Conservatory until they discovered that a black woman could teach classical music better than teachers with European surnames." The silence that followed was deafening. Several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Westfield Conservatory was revered among the city's cultural elite, and the mention of it completely changed the dynamic in the room. Victoria Caldwell visibly paled. She knew that story very well. She had been one of the concerned mothers who had pushed for Keisha's departure, claiming that their children needed more traditional influences in their musical education. That's a very serious accusation," Victoria stammered, trying to maintain her composure in front of the cameras that some guests still had turned on. "Accusation," Keisha repeated, a wry smile forming on her lips. "No, Mrs. Caldwell, an accusation would be what I could make about the emails you exchanged with the school administration. About the veiled threats to withdraw donations if an unsuitable person continued to influence your children's music education." The shock was immediate. Victoria tried to stammer out a response, but the words wouldn't come. How did Keisha know about the emails? How did she have access to private correspondence? Richardson stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Even if you have impressive credentials, that doesn't give you the right to interrupt our event and make unfounded accusations." 3 minutes, Keisha repeated, completely ignoring the attempt at intimidation. "You promised 3 minutes, and I intend to use every second of them." Tyler was still restless, and Keisha moved closer to take him back. "Sorry for the inconvenience," she said to the woman holding him, her voice softening as she spoke to the baby. "Daddy is watching you on TV, sweetheart. Let's show him what mommy is capable of." The mention that someone was watching on television made several people in the audience shift nervously. If this event was being broadcast, anything that happened here would become public instantly. Jonathan finally stood up. "Perhaps it's best to let the art speak for itself," he said, his voice cutting through the growing tensions. "After all, isn't that what you all say you value? The purity of artistic expression, free from prejudice." The challenge implicit in his words echoed through the auditorium. As one of the country's most respected critics, Jonathan was essentially putting his reputation on the line to defend Keisha, and everyone there knew it. Keisha adjusted Tyler against her chest, took a deep breath, and stepped into the center of the stage. The theatrical lighting created a halo around her, transforming this single mother into something almost ethereal. For a moment, the Metropolitan Cultural Center fell completely silent, as if even the air conditioning system had stopped to listen. What those privileged people didn't know was that every look of contempt, every condescending whisper, every gesture of impatience was fueling something inside Keisha that they could never understand, the transformative power of someone who had spent years being underestimated and was now about to show exactly what she was capable of. But before the first note could leave her lips, something completely unexpected happened. The lights in the auditorium flickered, and when they stabilized again, there were 3 more people standing at the main entrance to the theater, people who would turn that night into something much bigger than any of them could have imagined. The 3 figures who had just entered the auditorium made Victoria Caldwell's blood run cold. At the front walked David Chun, an investigative reporter for the national television network, carrying a professional camera and an air of someone who had sniffed out the story of the century. Beside him was Marcus Williams, Keisha's ex-husband and Tyler's father, wearing a suit that definitely did not suit the humble man Victoria remembered from years ago. And closing the trio was lawyer Carmen Rodriguez, known for her resounding victories in racial discrimination cases. "Sorry for the interruption," David said, his voice echoing through the auditorium as he turned on the camera. "I'm David Chun from News Network, and we're here for a live broadcast on a very interesting discrimination case that our network has been investigating over the past few months." Victoria felt her stomach sink. A live broadcast? That meant every word, every reaction, every look of contempt was being documented and sent to thousands of homes at that very moment. Richardson tried to intervene, but his voice came out thinner than usual. "I'm sorry, but this is a private event. We do not authorize filming without." "Actually," Carmen interrupted, opening a folder and removing some documents, "we checked with the Public Events Commission and discovered something interesting. This event, although presented as private, receives substantial public funding. This means that it is subject to the same transparency and access laws as any public space." The silence that followed was so deep that you could hear the hum of the stage lights. Keisha remained in the center, Tyler now calm in her arms, watching the scene unfold with a serenity that began to deeply disturb those who expected to see her break under pressure. Marcus approached the stage, his eyes meeting Keisha's with a mixture of pride and concern. "Hi, love," he said softly, but loud enough to be picked up by the microphones. "How's our boy?" The word "our" echoed through the auditorium like a bomb. This was not a desperate single mother as everyone had assumed. Tyler had a father who was present and clearly supportive of whatever Keisha was doing there. "He's fine," Keisha replied, her voice carrying a tenderness that contrasted dramatically with the tension in the room. "Watching mommy make history." Victoria tried to compose herself, realizing she was being filmed. I don't understand what's going on here. If you have a legal complaint, there is a proper process for." "Oh, but we followed all the proper processes," Carmen said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We filed formal complaints 6 months ago. We contacted the institution's ethics committee 4 months ago. We requested meetings 3 months ago. You have systematically ignored every attempt at civilized dialogue." David pointed the camera directly at Victoria. "Ms. Caldwell, can you comment on the emails you sent to Westfield Conservatory in 2019, in which you suggested that the presence of culturally inappropriate teachers was undermining the purity of your daughter's music education?" Victoria visibly paled. Those are private communications. You can't just." "Private," Carmen repeated, pulling more papers from her briefcase. "When sent to the official email address of a publicly funded educational institution, using terminology that formed the basis for discriminatory dismissal. In fact, they became evidence of civil rights violations." Jonathan, who had remained silent and observed everything, finally stood up. "Perhaps it's time to let art speak," he said, turning to Keisha. "After all, that's what you came here to do, isn't it?" Keisha nodded, adjusting Tyler against her chest. "Exactly that, Professor Mitchell." The formality in her voice surprised everyone. 3 minutes is what you promised, and 3 minutes is all I need to demonstrate exactly what you lost when you decided that my color was more important than my talent." Richardson looked nervously at the cameras, then at Victoria, clearly looking for a way out. "Look, if this is some kind of setup for a lawsuit." "Setup," Keisha repeated, and for the first time her voice carried a hint of genuine indignation. "Mr. Richardson, I graduated summa cum laude from Juilliard. I have a master's degree in vocal performance from Manhattan. I was a teacher at the most respected conservatory in this city until I was fired for budgetary reasons that coincidentally arose a week after concerned parents questioned my cultural adequacy." She paused, looking directly into David's camera. "The only thing I set up was this opportunity to show you, and the entire country, what happens when prejudice masquerades as tradition." Tyler chose that moment to let out a small laugh, as if approving of his mother's words. The innocent sound echoed through the tense auditorium, creating a poignant contrast between the child's purity and the cruelty of her surroundings. Victoria tried one last gambit. Even if you have the credentials you claim to have, that doesn't give you the right to disrupt our event and expose innocent people to this media ambush." "Innocent?" Carmen raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Caldwell, you organized a coordinated campaign to remove a qualified teacher based purely on racial prejudice. We have documented secret meetings, discriminatory emails, and even recordings of phone conversations where strategies were discussed." The audience began to murmur nervously. Some tried to slip out discreetly, others grabbed their cell phones to check if they were indeed being broadcast live. The atmosphere of cultural superiority that had dominated the evening was rapidly turning into thinly veiled panic. David pointed the camera at the audience. "For our viewers, we are at the Metropolitan Cultural Center, where a seemingly exclusive gala event has become the scene of one of the most dramatic displays of institutional discrimination we have ever witnessed." Keisha took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Years of humiliation, months of legal preparation, weeks of coordination with the media, all leading up to this moment. "Professor Mitchell," she said, "you once mentioned that true art has the power to transform consciousness. Are you ready to witness that happen?" Jonathan smiled, an expression of genuine anticipation lighting up his face. "I've been waiting 5 years for this moment, Keisha. The stage is yours." Tyler snuggled closer to his mother's chest, his little eyes closing as if he knew something magical was about to happen. Keisha looked at the tense audience, at the cameras rolling, at the faces that mixed curiosity, fear and discomfort, and finally allowed a small but confident smile to form on her lips. Under the weight of all those awkward stares, her hands positioned themselves delicately around Tyler, preparing to hold the microphone. But anyone watching closely would notice that it wasn't nervousness that made those hands adjust with precision. It was the absolute control of someone who is about to rewrite not only their own story, but the definition of excellence for an entire society. Keisha adjusted Tyler against her chest, closed her eyes for a brief moment, and began to sing without instrumental accompaniment, just her pure voice echoing through the silent auditorium. The first note that came out of her throat made time stand still. It wasn't just a voice, it was a force of nature, crystalline and powerful, that seemed to emerge from somewhere beyond technique, beyond training, beyond anything that elite audience had ever experienced. She began with amazing grace, but not the sanitized version that graced corporate events. It was the ancestral version, laden with spirituals, with historical pain transformed into transcendence, with generations of silenced voices now finding expression through her. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. Cell phones that seconds before had been used to escape the awkward situation now lay forgotten on laps, their owners mesmerized by the emotional force of that performance. Victoria Caldwell, who had spent the last 5 minutes trying to coordinate a discreet exit, was paralyzed. Her hands trembled visibly as tears streamed down her perfectly made-up face, smudging the expensive mascara she had carefully applied to impress the other members of high society. Richardson, the musical director who had tried to kick Keisha off the stage, was visibly shaken. His wide eyes and open mouth revealed the shock of someone who had just realized he had almost denied the world one of the most extraordinary voices of a generation. But it was during the second song, a devastating rendition of Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit, that Carmen decided it was time to act. "David," she whispered to the reporter, "start filming the audience. What's about to happen is going to be historic." As Keisha sang about strange bodies hanging from southern trees, Carmen opened her briefcase and began systematically removing documents, as if she were assembling the pieces of a devastating puzzle. "To our viewers," David said quietly to the camera, "we are witnessing not only an extraordinary performance, but what appears to be the live exposure of a case of systematic discrimination that our network has been investigating for months." Tyler, miraculously calm in his mother's arms, seemed mesmerized by the very voice that rocked him. Some members of the audience began to cry openly, not only because of the beauty of the music, but because of their growing understanding of the injustice that had been committed. When Keisha finished singing, the silence lasted for almost a full minute. No one dared break the spell of that moment with premature applause. It was then that Carmen took the stage, microphone in hand, and turned to the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Carmen Rodriguez, and I have been Keisha Hayes' legal representative for 6 months. What you have just witnessed was not only an extraordinary musical performance, but the voice of a woman who has been systematically silenced by a network of institutional discrimination." Victoria tried to stand up, clearly panicked. "This is absurd. We don't allow—" "Ms. Caldwell," Carmen interrupted, holding up a folder full of documents, "before you try to deny anything, you might want to hear some of the emails you sent to Westfield Conservatory." Carmen motioned to David, who pointed the camera directly at Victoria as Carmen began reading from the official document. Direct quote from the email dated March 15, 2019, "I am deeply concerned about the inappropriate cultural influence my daughter is receiving. A teacher who insists on mixing ethnic musical styles with our traditional classical curriculum is compromising the purity of the education we pay to receive." Murmurs of shock echoed through the audience. Several people turned to stare at Victoria, who was visibly shaking. Carmen continued, her sharp voice echoing through the auditorium. Email dated March 22. "If the administration does not take steps to remove culturally divisive influences from the faculty, I and other families will be forced to reconsider our significant financial support of the institution." "That's out of context," Victoria cried desperately. "You can't just—" "Context." Carmen smiled coldly. "We'll give you all the context you need." Email dated April 2. "Ms. Caldwell, this is not about racism, obviously, but about maintaining appropriate standards. Surely there are more traditional teachers available for these positions." Richardson tried to intervene, but Carmen had already turned to him. "Mr. Richardson, as the music director who signed Keisha's dismissal for budget cuts, can you explain why the budget for teachers was magically restored a week later when the position was filled by a candidate with half of Keisha's qualifications, but who, coincidentally, was the son of one of the institution's biggest donors?" The director turned completely pale. These are complex administrative issues that—" "Complex." Jonathan Mitchell finally stood up, his voice laden with indignation. "Richardson, I was present at the administrative meetings. You literally said that some parents had concerns about cultural appropriateness and that it would be more prudent to find someone less controversial for the position." Marcus, who had remained silent while observing everything, finally approached the stage. "For those watching at home," he said, looking directly at the cameras, "I would like to clarify something. My wife is not a desperate intruder. She has a master's degree from the Manhattan School of Music, has been a teacher for 3 years, and is here today because every door we tried to open through proper channels was slammed in our faces." Carmen nodded in agreement. "Exactly. We filed a formal complaint with the Civil Rights Commission 6 months ago. It was ignored. We requested meetings with the institution's board 4 months ago. They were denied. We attempted to mediate through appropriate legal channels 3 months ago. We were told that there was no legal basis for investigation." David pointed the camera at the audience, capturing the expressions of shock, shame, and outrage that spread across the faces of the gala guests. "It was only when our television network took an interest in the story that we suddenly found irregularities in the conservatory's hiring processes," Carmen continued. "Coincidentally, we discovered that several other qualified teachers from ethnic minorities had been let go due to budgetary issues over the past 5 years, always after similar complaints from concerned parents." Victoria tried one last desperate gambit. Even if some misunderstandings have occurred, that doesn't justify this humiliating public ambush." Keisha, who had remained silent throughout the exposé, finally took the microphone again. "Ms. Caldwell," she said, her voice maintaining the same serenity that had characterized her performance, "the only thing humiliating here is discovering that people in positions of power use their influence to silence voices that make them feel uncomfortable." She looked directly into the cameras. "I didn't come here to humiliate anyone. I came here to do what I've always done, sing. The fact that my voice, my education, and my talent bother people who prefer to keep art as the exclusive territory of the white elite, well, that says more about them than it does about me." Tyler chose that moment to flash a small smile, as if approving of his mother's words, creating a moment of tenderness amid the devastating tension. Carmen held up one last document. Finally, I have here a copy of Keisha's performance evaluation from the conservatory, dated 1 week before her dismissal. Rating, exceptional in all areas. Students show remarkable progress. Recommended for promotion to full professor. The auditorium fell completely silent. Victoria was visibly crying now, not from emotion over the music, but from shame and panic. Richardson stared at the floor, unable to face anyone in the room. A week later, Carmen continued inexorably, the same exceptional teacher was fired for inadequate performance. What an extraordinary coincidence. David turned to his cameras for a final comment. For our viewers at home, we are concluding a truly historic live broadcast from the Metropolitan Cultural Center, where an evening that was supposed to celebrate the arts has become a devastating exposé of how systemic prejudice operates in the country's most prestigious cultural institutions. As camera flashes captured every expression of shock, shame, and belated recognition in the auditorium, one thing became clear: this was not just a victory for Keisha Hayes, but a defining moment that would redefine how the city's cultural elite would view themselves from then on. In the center of that hall where discrimination disguised as tradition once reigned, a new reality was now taking shape, like a symphony finally finding its harmony after years of dissonant notes, proving that true excellence knows no color, social class, or limitations imposed by those who fear true greatness. 3 months later, Keisha Hayes signed a contract with the largest record label in the country. Her first song, Strange Voices, about discrimination in the arts, reached #1 on all platforms. The Metropolitan Cultural Center invited her to be its artistic director, an invitation she politely declined. Victoria Caldwell lost her position on the committee after a federal investigation. Richardson was fired from the conservatory. Both watched, embarrassed, as Keisha received a Grammy for Best Debut Album on television. "I didn't come here to destroy careers," Keisha said in an interview. "I came to show that talent has no color. The real victory is not seeing enemies fall, but proving that we were always up to the task from the beginning." Tyler, now walking, applauded from the audience as his mother sang in theaters where she had once been rejected. Marcus smiled proudly. His wife had turned humiliation into a cultural revolution. Jonathan Mitchell summed it up perfectly: they wanted to silence a voice. They ended up amplifying a movement. The best revenge has never been to destroy those who hurt you, but to build something so great that they have to give you a standing ovation. If this story of overcoming adversity touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that our greatness does not depend on the approval of others.